Okay. Hi, and welcome to the ISSIP Service Design Speaker Series. I am Payal. I'm a designer and strategist, and also the managing partner of the Thinking Hats, which is an innovation company. I'm chairing the Service Design Speaker Series for ISSIP, and through the series, we are hoping to start interesting conversations, engage academia and industry on various aspects of what, who, and why of service design. I would request all the participants to stay on mute and also not come on video, as that might distract the speakers. Moving on, if you have any questions as the speakers speak, please type them out in the chat channel. We will read out your questions towards the end, and the last 10 to 15 minutes will be Q&A. So that's when all the questions will be read out and the speakers will answer them for you. So our today's topic is developing the design capabilities in organizations, diluting or condensing design innovation skills. Our speakers for today's talk are Filipe, Dr. Lisa, Anna, and Dr. Daniela. I'll hand them over to you now, and they'll introduce them. I'd ask them to introduce themselves to you and start the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Payal. We introduce ourselves. I am Daniela Sangiorgi. I'm associate professor at the Department of Design of Politecnico di Milano.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a PhD candidate in Linköping University in Sweden.
Hi, my name is Filipe Lima, and I'm a PhD candidate in the design department at Politecnico di Milano.
Hi, I'm Lisa Malmberg. I'm a service designer working within healthcare in the region of Sörmland in Sweden.
Okay, so we are all here together because somehow we are, the commonality between us is the fact that there is an interest in the transformational role of design, and in particular in how design has been gradually embedded into different kind of organizations. And there has been a series of studies looking into specifically how organizations are trying to develop and embed design capabilities in different kind of contexts and organizations. And why we are interested in this topic, because in the last decade there has been a transformation in the role of design. So design, in particular service design, has been initially focused and involved in projects with different kind of organizations, with the idea to solve problems, to develop solutions to existing problems, working in a more consultancy manner. Given the transformation of the context of the society and the economic context, more and more design is called, and designers are called, not just to leave a solution behind, but also the tools and the capability for ongoing change. And that's why somehow there has been an interest in trying to understand then how to embed design capability into organizations, and how these capabilities are actually able to transform the innovation capability or change the culture of the organizations and so on. And this visualization is showing how, for example, the first one is the original Danish Design Center ladder that has been looking into how gradually design can work, organization can gradually develop design capability in organization, moving from design as more a style to design as a process, to design as a strategy. So there has been gradually a more strategic role, and this model has been then applied also in the public sector, in the third sector, trying to show how design can have a wider impact. Maybe design can become not a professional capability, but a more distributed capability in organizations. and design can move more towards strategic role, or for example, in public sector, or also toward design for policy. So this is somehow the background that has led to some specific questions that we would like to deal with you today. So first is, what do we mean with design capabilities? Because this is one of the way we look into the transformational role of design in organizations. How can design capability be developed and sustained in different kind of organizations, and what are the limitation implications of different kind of approaches that are used to diffuse design in organizations. So I leave now the floor to Anna.
Thanks. So I'll be talking a bit about design capabilities in technology-driven companies. And this is actually the context that I'm currently researching, and one of the reasons why technology-driven companies have been of particular interest to me is also because of this kind of ongoing trend that tech companies are actually becoming service-oriented and are viewing themselves increasingly as service companies. And when I say technology-driven companies, I mean companies which have a strong technical component or have a strong tradition in either software development or R&D. So these companies are starting to view, or have been viewing, their products increasingly as services, and are trying to make this change becoming more customer focused. However, this doesn't always go well, or doesn't always go as planned. And I think that this quote that I have here on the slide, and it's a quote from one of my informants from the multiple case study research that I have been doing, actually depicts what usually the problem becomes. So although these companies would often say, yes, we do care about the customers, we are trying to innovate in a way that's more participatory, they still are somehow impressed with solving the technical or the functional issues of their technology that they often tend to forget, or just cannot fully grasp the complexity of the value they should be actually creating for different actors. So in the next slide, you can also see that one of the reasons why this understanding of value has also become more complex is because of the changing innovation environment. So the innovation environment, especially with tech-driven companies, is very dynamic and very competitive. There are many opportunities, of course, and even established companies are exploring opportunities of collaboration. But there are also many threats, and even in the more stable markets, this is something that is present. So this means that problems are not only becoming more ambiguous, but that the companies need to actually worry with, they affect more people. So the companies need to take care of many actors in their ecosystems and think about the value that they're actually providing to many of them. And this can sometimes be quite challenging. So in this transition to becoming a service company, to viewing products as a service or software as a service, what they're trying to do and what they have been doing is they're finding new approaches to boost creativity and innovation, and design-driven approaches to innovation are the ones that are actually becoming more and more prominent. So in the next slide, you will see that the perspectives that I've been using in addressing kind of these questions on how do organizations use service design approach to build capabilities, and through these capabilities to reach the sustained service innovation in a dynamic environment. I've been looking at the problem through the perspective of both service innovation and service design, but I'm also integrating dynamic capabilities, which is a framework from innovation management literature, actually. And dynamic capabilities, this is a framework, but actually dynamic capability designates the ability to integrate and to build and to reconfigure both internal and external competences to address the rapidly changing environment. So the organizations who do possess dynamic capabilities, they have this core competence that is somehow self-adjusting, which actually makes the competitive response or the response to the dynamic environment more resilient. And on the other slide, the key insights from one of my current research projects, where I've been studying actually big established technology companies, so big companies that have been using to some capacity design-driven approaches to innovate for at least 5 years internally. We've seen that the design capabilities can be seen through different kinds of design practices that depend both on how the organization positions design within the organizations, but also what kind of expectations these organizations have on the role of the design in the innovation process. So some of the insights from the current research that I'm conducting is that these roles of design can be either seen as design as facilitation of innovation process. And this is something more connected to using design practice in, for example, innovation workshops, or for ideation purposes, or for creating new service concepts. Another very common role, which actually depicts a more mature stage, is the role of designers in the strategic repositioning, meaning that this strategic reposition becomes more as a business orientation of the organization, where design now plays a prominent role in becoming more customer-centric or human-centric and doing innovation in a more participatory and iterative way. And the third role is actually transformative adaptation, something that tech companies are striving to achieve. And it actually encompasses more firm design integration across the entire organizations. So some of the challenges, of course, as you will see on the next slide, it's not uncommon that the companies face them. Some of the common ones that have been reported in the analysis that we're currently doing is the problem of addressing either contexts or very customer-specific limitation during the design process in innovation. And this goes all the way from projects to some pilots where, for example, because you're developing technology for military or for a specific context, such as, I don't know, chemical industry, it is sometimes very difficult going from a pilot to actual service implementation. Another quite common challenge is providing enough resources for developing unfeasible concepts. This is less of a problem in organizations that are more mature in integrating design or having certain design capability in the organization, but it still represents a quite common challenge. And finally, something that we've observed is legitimizing design roles, both to internal and external stakeholders in the organization. And I think now Filipe will continue with some of his insights.
Yeah, hello. So in my case, I will be presenting parts of my PhD research that is mostly connected to private and public sector organizations that are currently trying to embed design capabilities internally. So these organizations are currently facing a challenge connected to how to transfer and scale design knowledge so that it doesn't remain residing within a department, within a unit, within a group of professional designers. So they already went through a first initial step to establish their own design teams, and they are currently undergoing efforts in order to transfer this knowledge across the organization. So for that, there are different motivations, starting from a utilitarian one, so that they can have more resources, more people who can engage in service design activities internally without having to hire more people that will have financial costs for the organization over the long run. And then there is a transformational perspective that is to impact the organizational life over the long run. So introduce new ways of thinking and new ways of doing across the organization and not remaining bounded within a department or a unit. For that, I looked into two different settings. So within the public sector, I looked into a regional county council that established a design lab focused on healthcare setting. And they were interested in transferring this knowledge from the professional designers into the broader members of the county council and the healthcare system in which it is embedded. On the other hand, I also looked into the case of an Italian consulting organization that started actually as a training organization, and over time it has expanded its business offerings to provide also the development of online business communities and design-related services for its clients. And then their interest into transferring and scaling design knowledge internally was to establish an overarching organizational approach to service innovation that was not only dependent on these professional designers, but across the organization. There are different ways that we could be looking into how these experts transfer knowledge across the organization and empower other people to engage in design. The lenses that I adopted for this study was the knowledge transfer perspective from the broader field of knowledge management. So knowledge management is a broad field that tries to look into several organizational processes that can influence how knowledge and knowledge entities can be leveraged in order to better achieve organizational goals. Within the knowledge transfer perspective, there have been authors that have been addressing issues at several levels, connected to several elements. So there have been research focused more on the role of the individuals, also research on the type of knowledge that is being transferred. Additionally, some researchers looked into the role of the organizational context in itself and how it might affect the transference. But during this presentation, I will be just talking about overall knowledge strategies, tactics, and mechanisms that might be put in place in organizations in order to leverage design knowledge. So to provide a little background, organizations might be relying on different strategies. They may be relying on social networks, people transferring knowledge to other people in the organization, or relying instead on the use of documents and technology as the approach to transfer design knowledge. And secondly, these approaches might be more individualized, so remaining mostly informally driven and also happening in the individual level in the organization, or becoming more institutionalized, so becoming more formal and collective, achieving a wider scale in the organization. What I observed during my research in these two different settings, that there's been a strong emphasis on the use of the personalization strategy. So on the use of these professional designers as the source, at least the initial source, to transfer this knowledge across the organization. There has been no knowledge strategy defined by the managerial people in the organization to plan on how the process would evolve over time in the organizations. What we can see is the use of three main mechanisms that allow these organizations to scale design knowledge internally. So initially there has been a focus on the collaborative service design projects. In this way, organizations didn't need to sacrifice their normal operations. They bring in together service designers and staff members, but the transference was mostly one-to-one in between the professional designers and the staff members. So it was difficult to achieve scale. At the same time, there was also not a strong emphasis on the transference of knowledge because there were also strong, there was a strong need to deliver outcomes from these projects. So the learning and the transference was not the main goal. Later and over time, the people who initially took part in these projects started to enable the transference on their own across the organization. There we can see that the transference was no longer dependent on these professional designers, and also other staff members were enabling the transference across the organization. So this was a way in which the transference of design knowledge started to reach other parts of the organization, when staff members by themselves enabled the transference. And later, we also have the support from management, from the organization, into establishing formal training sessions. So in this way, these mechanisms become more institutionalized. Knowledge transfer become recognized within the organization, and this allows to change the transfer relationship structure. It is because a few staff members, professional designers in particular, were able to transfer this knowledge to a wider audience. There were several challenges that were found in terms of the strategies used in the organizations. Mostly there was this assumption that design knowledge transfer will occur naturally in the organization, even without a formally stated strategy or someone responsible to plan and to manage those distributed activities that were happening across the organization, sometimes at the same time, other times at different times. There were also lack of incentives for these activities. And this means that overall design knowledge transfer was still happening mostly organically, and there was no formal knowledge strategy to support those activities. And then there are also limitations associated because there was this lack of planning and structure related to a tendency to prefer and to go into adopting personalization strategies, so the social networks and individualized statics. That means that this transference was mostly remain bound to social networks that were happening in small groups, while that increased the responsiveness because people could informally contact each other to reach and to receive or to transfer knowledge to each other. At the same time, it was difficult to achieve scale if we don't consider the totality or integration of the different mechanisms operating together.
Were you finished there, Filipe? Okay, so I will then present a little bit about continuing within the public sector organizations. I will start by giving a short context to within the public sector. There's a big need for this transformation, as Daniela was talking about. As you can see, within healthcare we will have a much larger population with chronic diseases, which means that we will have a larger need for welfare and healthcare services. I'm sorry for the picture in Swedish, but I've tried to translate it, and basically it says that we in Sweden over the coming years, this is showing then the percentage of how many people that will be working compared to how many people that will be elderly and so on. So what we see here is that at the same time as we are having an increased demand for welfare services, we will also be fewer people that are within a working age that can provide these services. So within healthcare, but also in other areas of public sector, we must find new ways to deliver our services. And this is a challenge partly because we haven't been used to working with development in this kind of way. Many public sector organizations are quite hierarchical and also risk aware for very good reasons. But at the same time, this then presents a barrier or a mismatch with how design practice works, where we start very open and try to test in early stages. So this is a challenge that we have to overcome when disseminating design within these kind of organizations. At the same time, we do have a match and in some ways a hook for design to use as a lever, and that is that many public sector organizations are focusing and working with people, and especially within healthcare we have lots of empathy, and many of these organizations are traditionally very good at finding solutions. So in that sense, there's also, at the same time as we have these barriers, we also have this match with design that we can use. So on the next slide you can see the perspectives that I'm basing my work on. And when I did my PhD, I was looking at, okay, so how can we define what design capability is? And I looked both through literature and also then through empirical studies, and saw that created a definition that organization The design capability is about the organization's ability to utilize design, and for that to happen, the organization must both have an awareness and knowledge about what design is and how it can contribute in their particular context. But of course, we also need resources, which is, of course, people that are trained in design and are able to use the methods and perspective and approaches that we have within the design practice. So some of what Filipe was also talking about. Lastly, I could see very clearly that we also then need the structures within the organizations that will enable the use of these design practices. And looking from an organizational learning perspective called absorptive capacity, we could see that these this capability we need to work with both the exploratory learning to understand and see, which is similar then to what Filipe was just talking about in these collaborative projects. But then we also need to go into transformative learning, where we start to reflect on how does this design practice fit with the practice that we already have, with how we are used to working with development, and to create then these enabling structures. So on the next slide then we have a little bit of what we can see now when I'm working within a healthcare organization. I can start with saying that I recognize very much of what both Anna and Filipe are seeing in their studies. But in general, there is a lack of structure and support for development work, whether it's design driven or if it's taking its base in another perspective. But in general, there's a lack of support for development work. And we have also seen that finding a key for design to how to get into the organization and legitimize itself is very important. In our case, that has to a largest extent been through person-centeredness. So that as our organization wants to develop their person-centeredness, we can argue that, okay, so design and service design is a good approach and tool for doing that. And in that way, we can then gain what you say, legitimization, that they see the value that we contribute. In other organizations, I have seen that this way in is also through digitalization or so it's a bit different depending on the organization and what kind of focus they have. But to find this way that you get in the door, so to speak. In general, in Sweden, at least within the public sector, a lot of focus related to the knowledge transfer of design has been on methods and tools. And we can see that even though this is really important as it builds the capacity and develops the design resources within the organization, more people who have knowledge about the design practice. At the same time, it is not sufficient as it does not develop these enabling structures. So we train, for example, nurses or civil servants and doctors in design methods and tools, but they do not have support within their organizations to use these design practices in development work. So that is both an experience and also then, of course, a challenge. So on the next slide, then we can see that I would say that one of our main challenges working within healthcare is to find a balance between the core practice, which is of course healthcare, and the development work, and find a way to um, engage management and develop their understanding of what design practice is and can bring to that kind of organization that we're in. But also um, creating an understanding within management that they need to be involved in the development work, not hands down involved in specific projects, but involved so that they help developing these enabling structures for development work. And part of that is, of course, then to build a development friendly culture within the organization. We also see that Anna was mentioning that one of the challenges is to legitimize the design practice with both internal and external stakeholders, and that's something that we also see as a challenge. One of our challenges is actually that our users are not used to being asked to be involved in development work. So it's a cultural shift both for our healthcare staff that we want to engage in development work, but also for our patients that we want to involve. We also struggle with gaining a mandate to work with more strategic projects, as Daniela was mentioning in the beginning with the staircase. Most of the time, projects are more of a reactive sort, so that we have this challenge, this problem now that we need to develop and solve. So that is part of it. I think it's probably related to being part of a politically governed organization where we struggle with having both a political management and also a civil servant management, and that together have to build some kind of strategy for how to move the organization forward. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've already been running out of time, so we can say just that there are many similar challenges in all the contexts, but also at the same time organization has matured, so there are also much more possibilities. So I think now we have a little time, maybe for a few questions. I can open the chat, or Payal, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can read out the questions to you. Yes. So we have one question from Lorenko, and the question is, did you consider any research reports made by recognized industry analyst firms like Gartner, Forrester, and the ones published by consulting firms like McKinsey, and relevant players that have done a recognized work in some of these topics? Example, in design maturity, Envision did several studies and published several reports. Daniela, would you like to take this question?
Well, I'm personally not been working a lot on the design maturity concepts. My work is mainly on, in general, design for transformation, public transformation. So I've been mainly looking into the specific role on the design professionals working within or for public organizations. So I'm not familiar with this kind of work, these reports.
Okay.
If maybe Lorenzo want to share something with us.
I'll go to the next question. We have Carol, who's asking us, what are some service design methods that you found on your research that worked well to scale design in organizations?
Well, I can maybe take this one. I don't know if it's really a method, and I think Lorenzo had another similar questions down further. Key factors that help scale design in the organization. At least from my case studies, what I could see is that it really helps if there is some top management or even middle management person, not necessarily a designer, who supports and understands design methods in the innovation process. With regards to methods, what's really, there are different ones, of course, but what somehow comes up as maybe most beneficial in, how to say, in this legitimization process of design that kind of opens up the perspective of other people within the company of why design approaches are beneficial are ideation workshops. So any kind of platform where you can engage people and show them that you know, they're experts of their own experiences, how this can inform the concept development, how this can inform all the other parts of the development process seem to be pretty valuable to get people on the train. But then from there on, there are of course other challenges that can arise. But I think, and I think this is something that Lisa also found both in her research and practice, having this support both top down up, so from bottom up, but also from top down, is what will actually kind of facilitate this transformation in the organization. I don't know if anyone else wants to add something on that.
No, I can only agree with what you're saying. We have also found that just, it might sound really simple, but just to encourage people to start going out and actually asking users, so with simple interviews, is a very also important first step to also legitimize. They quite fast see the power of getting the perspective of the user. They realize quite quickly that, okay, so it is an added value to have that perspective as well in the development work.
And just to add a final word, also, I found in my research that even if people know, for example, the tools, they might still not be able to put them into practice. So I think it's important to create this distinction between the explicit design knowledge, the tools that people know about, and then the tacit design knowledge that when they gain experience in knowing how to put them then into use within the organization so that they can create value. So one of the issues I found in my research is that some of the staff members, okay, they could describe and they could say that they knew a few of the service design tools, but then they didn't know how to bring them back into their own context. So I think the question needs to go a bit further than the tool, and to include also the know-how, so knowing how to apply it, the tacit knowledge, and also the cognitive tacit knowledge, that is the mental models, the ways of thinking. I think if you can bring these two things, the ways of thinking and ways of doing, then the tools will be valuable for the organization. Otherwise, if it's just awareness, like Lisa says, just knowing about that tool and not knowing how to bring it back so that it can create value for some unit in the organization, or how it makes sense in their own specific context, it doesn't result in anything, at least from the cases I've been studying. That sometimes happens, that people know very well the tool, but they know how it fits their context. So
I've seen that a lot too.
I really like what you said about mental models, and it's so important to kind of implement all the ideas and very well in a structured format. So thank you for that. There's one more question I'm going to just read out quickly. I think this is very interesting because, so this is from Annie Helensky, And the question is, what do you think is the role of design leadership in building design capabilities in organizations? At which point is design leadership needed? When we have more and more designers hired inside the government or more design projects commissioned?
I can start to answer that one. I think the role of design leadership is very important, especially in these design novice or non-intensive organizations, to actually tie back to what Filipe was just saying, that we need the design leadership to support the people that have just started to design, to understand also um, the the contributions that design can bring, and to kind of push the use of design, so that it does not become that you follow the same recipe in each project, because as Filipe said, you need to be aware and think about, okay, so how do I apply these methods in this project? What methods should I choose in this project, and so on. So in that sense, design leadership and this seniority is, I would say, very important, because I can sometimes see that in some of the organizations that I meet, that there's a an understanding of design that's becoming a little bit diluted, that design is the same thing as just involving users, and then you kind of miss all the other things that design also contributes with the systemic perspective, and all these other things with the reflection in practice and everything like that. So I think it's very important to have someone that can um, make sure and see that you also have that level. Otherwise, the design won't really contribute that much in the organization.
Yeah, if I can just add briefly to that, I think it's a great question, but I don't think there is a simple answer. At least from my studies that I did, there was a case when a senior management position, the person was hired there who understood the value of especially human-centered design, and they facilitated bringing more designers on board. And then in another case, it kind of went from the smaller design department that kind of struggled and fought their way into becoming more strategically important. So there's a certain pet dependency of the companies that will also probably that will depend on how this is done. But what I've also seen is it's quite a different who designs, because in some organization it is designers, either with interaction design or a graphic design or product design training. In some organizations it's actually developers or system architects or even business people who have started getting training in design thinking or other design activities. So I think that's also the question of how design becomes legitimized and how the design leadership is done in the organization. Not saying that one is better than the other, but there are differences, I think, that also contribute to how design is understood, either maybe more as these tools that we apply to different projects, or do we provide maybe more human-centered and systemic perspective to defining problems and solutions to those problems?
Yeah, thank you so much. I know we have a lot of burning questions, and but we are over time, and we'd like to be mindful of everyone's time. So what we're going to do is we're going to upload the slides on our website, and please, sign up for our newsletter. Go to ISSIP.org, sign up for our newsletter so we can keep you updated on the events that are happening. Thank you, Yassi, so much for sharing the link. And next week we have Asli Ors from Cisco. So please join us back in. And I'd really like to thank all of our speakers today for giving such a great talk. Thank you, Anna, Filipe, Daniela, and Lisa for walking us through what design is in organizations right now. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.